We are on Daf Ayin Aleph Amud Aleph, 71b, and the Gemara is discussing when somebody did multiple sins in one shagaga, in one ha'alama, at one time that was unbeknownst to him that there was a sin, whether it was he didn't know that this thing was prohibited or that this particular item was a part of the prohibition. For instance, he didn't know that chaylev is prohibited, the forbidden fats are prohibited, or he knew but didn't know that this was chaylev, and he ate them. So he ate them multiple times, and the machlokas that we saw between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish is if he became aware, he became aware of one of the prohibitions and one of the sins that he had done, and not one of the other ones. So he became aware. So everybody agrees, if he became aware of one and went all the way forward until he actually brought the sin offering for the first one, even though he had, in that same lapse of knowledge of the sin, he had done a second prohibition as well, as a second transgression as well of that same prohibition. Nevertheless, the first korban is not going to work for the second transgression because the first offering was already offered and the atonement was done by the time he became aware of the second. And as we mentioned multiple times, in order to bring a sin offering, one has to become aware and made known of the lapse of the transgression. So that awareness came after the first offering already been brought, for sure it's no good. And if he became aware prior to even designating, if he became aware prior to designating a sin offering, of course it will also count as a korban. It'll count for the other. But the question is, where is this machlokas? What do they disagree about? So that's what we're up to. It's about 5 or 6 lines before the wide lines. Amalei Ravina la Ravashi. Ravina said to Ravashi, "This yadale koydem afrasha pli." He said he already became aware, but it was unbeknownst to him. He became aware of the second sin prior to designating the korban. That's where Rabbi Yochanan says that he will need a separate korban because he became aware and of the sin offering separately. And Rish Lakish says no, since he had not yet separated a korban for one, it'll work for the other. And this is the basis of machlokas. One says as soon as you become aware of one sin without the other, that is enough to separate them. And Rish Lakish says no, you have to have separated an offering for the one in order for it not to cover the other. But if you became aware of one transgression, and then you became aware of another transgression, all in the same lapse, and then you designated a offering for the one, it'll cover the other. But after you've already separated an offering, you became aware of the second transgression, there Rish Lakish will agree to Rabbi Yochanan, you've already separated one offering for the one sin, not knowing that you had the other sin in that same lapse, so it won't cover it. The Chaim Shtaim, and there you'd need two separate offerings. O Dilma, or perhaps everybody agrees that if you separated it, if you became aware of the second sin in that same lapse prior to having separated a sin offering, even Rabbi Yochanan says that one offering will count for both. And Rabbi Yochanan is only saying that one will not count for the other, and you need two separate offerings if you've already separated an offering for one, not knowing that you had, in the same lapse, transgressed the second time. And Rabbi Yochanan is of the opinion because that once you've separated the sin offering, the chatas, that counts as a divider between the two transgressions. U'ma'asava kaparas mechalkas. Rish Lakish says, no, only if you've already brought the offering and it's atoned for you, it'll atone for one and not for the other, because that is a dividing factor. That'll separate the two transgressions because you've already brought the sin offering for one. But before you've designated one offering, before you will mafresh the chatas, you separated this offering as a chatas. There, even Rabbi Yochanan would agree to Rish Lakish that becoming aware of one, and then later becoming aware of the other transgression within the same lapse, they would count. Offering for one would cover the other. That you only have to bring one offering, or perhaps a dilma, or perhaps either one is going to be for both of these. It's going to be machlokes. Rish Lakish says, regardless of when you found out of the second sin, as long as you haven't brought the first korban, it'll cover the second transgression as well. And Rabbi Yochanan says, no, as long as you became aware of the one lapse, of the one transgression, and then later became aware of the second transgression, and you didn't become aware of both of them at once, even though that both transpired within the same lapse of knowledge, and therefore the shgaga, the alama, the inadvertent sin, happened under one lapse, and they're about the same transgression. Nevertheless, they will count as two separate transgressions, and you have to bring two separate offerings because you became aware of them separately. Amar Le, so Ravashi responded to Ravina, indeed, it seems like this third option. Bein bezu, mistabra, bein bezu machloikas, that the machloikas is on both. And the basis for his saying that this is logical is based on how they responded to each other's text proof. Rish Lakish had a text proof. He said that I can prove to you that even on part of becoming aware of part of the transgression is going to cover the other transgression within the same lapse, because the Torah, in bringing the sin offering, said of his sin offering, and it'll atone for him. So we see it doesn't have to be the whole sin. Even part of the sin, it will be covered by it. Rabbi Yochanan responded to that and said, no, you know when that's talking about? That's talking about when he had a full one. The first time he ate a full kazayas, the requisite amount, in order to be obligated in a sin offering. And then in that same lapse, he ate a half, which doesn't count as a full amount. And later, he ate in a separate lapse another half. Now the question is, do those two combine? And we say it does not combine on account of he became aware of the first transgression within the first lapse. And since he's bringing a sin offering for that first transgression in the first lapse, the partial transgression, meaning the partial amount, a half an olive size that he ate within that same lapse, can no longer combine with what he did after that, on account of that lapse has already had an atonement. So it's a very odd case of he ate one kazayas, and then he ate a half a kazayas, and then became aware, and then forgot again, and ate another half kazayas, and he brought in and became aware of his transgression of the first olive size, the first kazayas, without becoming aware of the other half. And when he brought the atonement, or when he becomes obligated for the atonement offering, for the chatas, for the first olive size, that will negate the half olive size that's within that same lapse from combining with the next. Why did Rabbi Yochanan have to go to that case? Why did Rabbi Yochanan just say, when the verse is talking about? The verse is talking about somewhere when he's already, before he's designated any offering. And he's not designated an offering, that's why they'll combine. And since he didn't say that, so we see he holds that even if you haven't designated an offering, just by the very fact that you became aware of one transgression in the lapse and not the other, that separates them. Because otherwise he had a much easier case to say that the verse is talking about that the sin offering can atone for part of the lapse, and it'll atone for the whole thing, that will that would be a case where you only became aware of one transgression in the lapse, and then you designated and then you became aware of the second, and that's where having designating a sin offering for one of the transgressions will cover the other, and that's why the Torah says mechataso, of his sin. Rabbi Yochanan didn't say that. Simpler answer. Obviously, he holds even there, just becoming aware of the sin offering is going to be a dividing factor. Reish Lakish also is going to argue, even if you've already designated a sin offering, you designate an animal for your offering, nevertheless, one can the becoming aware of one and designated a sin offering will cover the other transgression within that same lapse. And why do we say that? Because Reish Lakish, Rabbi Yochanan had proof text for his opinion from the pasuk that says Al Chataso Vehevi. He will bring a sin offering for his sin, meaning the entire sin, everything that he transgressed. And there, Reish Lakish said, you know what that's talking about? That's talking about if he already brought the carbon and it's been sacrificed and it's atoned for him. At that point, he becomes aware of a second transgression in that lapse. Well, the offering that's already been brought can't retroactively work for that. Since he had to go to that extreme and say the offering has already been brought, that tells us that if the offering had not been brought, even if it's been designated, it will still cover the other lapse. And only if it's already been shechted and already been brought on the Mizbeach and it's already atoned for him, that's when we're going to say, look, the atonement has already been done, and therefore it won't work. So that's the proof that Ravina brings to Rav Ashi to tell him that we see that indeed Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish are the two extremes, and they argue in both cases whether you just became aware now, or whether you already designated a sin offering for one and the other. And for one, Reish Lakish says, since they were both transgressions within the same lapse, having designated a carbon for one, that carbon offering will cover the other transgression in that same lapse. And Reish Lakish says, and Rabbi Yochanan says, no, just becoming aware of one transgression within the lapse, without becoming aware of the other, separates them, and you would need a sin offering for each one separately. And so we're back to the Gemara in the first wide line. Because if you think that they argue prior to having designated the sin offering, but Reish Lakish would agree to Rabbi Yochanan once you've designated the offering that you need to bring two separate ones, and the one you've designated for the first transgression cannot cover the second one. So why did he say that the verse that was Rabbi Yochanan's proof text is talking about specifically after atonement, like melach hafrasha? You could say even before atonement, just having designated the offering. And same, v'iyach hafrasha pligi. And if you would say that they're only arguing after it's been designated, a sin offering has been designated, Rabbi Yochanan would agree to Reish Lakish if all that happened was that he became aware of one transgression prior to the other, but he had not designated an offering yet. And then he would agree. Why did he have to go to the odd case of he ate an olive size and then he ate another half olive size, as we explained before? Like Mekadim Afrasha, you could just explain that we're talking about, the verse is talking about the part that I agree to you with, which is that if he had just become aware but not actually designated an offering. So the Gemara says no. Perhaps that's no proof. The fact that the Gemara is telling us that they have the extremes to provide as meaning for the opposite text support, not text support text. That's no proof that they're arguing in both cases in the middle. Maybe the Gemara doesn't know where the argument is. And they know they're disagreeing, but doesn't know to what extreme. And therefore the Gemara says they all agree on one extreme, they all agree on the other extreme, and that's where the proof text can be explained. And in the middle, we don't know where the argument is, and that's why we couldn't say one supports that the text is in one case or the other. And the Gemara is saying, even if they're arguing, even in this case, nevertheless, there is a case they agree. If you're going to tell me that they disagree, even in the case where he has not yet designated an offering yet, Rabbi Yochanan is going to say, since he became aware of the one sin, it can no longer bring one offering for that for the other sin as well. Rabbi Yochanan, so what's Rabbi Yochanan going to explain the verse in? Because in this odd case of having eaten an olive size and then a half olive size. And if you're going to tell me that they disagree only after having designated an offering, Rish Lakish can explain the verse. He's going to explain it after kapara, after it is already fully atoned. That's where Rish Lakish is going to say, having brought the one offering will not cover the other. Essentially, we now have in Machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish saying that the one offering you brought can, one offering you designated, or having become aware of one sin, a transgression within that lapse, will cover another transgression of the same kind in that lapse. And Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan says it does not cover. And the question is only whether or not it'll cover for both. Hello? Oh. Is anybody having trouble hearing me?
No.
Back to the Gemara. So Amar Ula, we are again at the bottom of Ayin Aleph Amid Base, 71b. Amar Ula. So Ula said, according to the opinion that says that an Asham Vade does not need knowledge. So we need a little bit of an introduction for this Gemara. Right now, we've been talking about a chatas offering. A chatas always comes for a sin that somebody did not know that they were transgressing at the time that they were transgressing. And then, after becoming aware, they bring a sin offering. There is something called a asham, a sin offering. There are three types of ashams, which come which you bring even if you knew at the time of the sin that you were doing a sin. For sure, if you didn't know. But even if you knew at the time of the sin that you were sinning, you bring a sin offering. That's called an asham. And that comes for the sin of a false oath. So if the person didn't know he was making a false oath and made the false oath, for sure. But even if he knew that he was lying at the time he made the false oath, that's an asham. The second is asham me'ilos. That's an asham for having misused kachim. That somebody misused the kachim offering, a carbon, they will have to pay back 125% and bring asham offering for it. And asham shivcha charufa. Exactly what a shivcha charufa is a discussion in the Gemara, but it is a maidservant that someone had relations with, obviously halachically transgression. This person is going to bring a sin offering for that transgression, even if he knew at the time that he did this. Now, the question is, if somebody did so inadvertently. So Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Tarfon disagree. Well, one second. And then there's another type of asham, which is called asham talui. Asham for someone who is not sure whether or not they transgressed a sin offering. So, for instance, somebody has two pieces of meat in front of them. One is kosher, one is not. And they ate one without the other. And now they don't know well, did I or did I not transgress? Because I don't know which one I ate. So that's an asham tali. Now, an asham usually for a sin offering, you bring it only once you know that you've sinned. An asham tali, you don't have to know that you sin, and in fact, sometimes you will never know whether you sinned or not. That's what the asham tali is. Now, somebody can designate an asham talui, and then become aware that in fact they sinned, and then they bring the sin offering. Unless the transgression that they transgress is one of these three, where at first they're not sure whether or not they misused kudshim. So they have to bring an asham talui, a sin offering for not knowing whether or not they transgressed. That's an asham talui, basically a hanging in the balance, a hanging asham. They don't know whether or not they transgressed. So in that case, they will bring the asham, but that same korban would be the same once somebody comes and says, by the way, you know that what that animal you used yesterday was actually a hektish animal. It belonged to Kodesh, and therefore you need you've misused hektish, and you need to bring the kachim. So you need to bring the me'ilah. So it went from unsure whether they transgressed or not to for sure having transgressed, but it's the same exact korban. So here Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon disagree. Rabbi Akiva says it won't work. The korban that he brought in the state of doubt will not cover the obligation of an asham he has for the state of certainty, because he was uncertain. He has to first be certain, and then he can bring the offering. However, Rabbi Tarfon says no. Since it's exactly the same korban, the offering that he brings in a state of doubt whether he's transgressed or not is the same sin offering that he brings once he becomes aware that he's transgressed, because they're both in asham, which are a ram. And therefore, even though he didn't know yet, the sin offering that he brought in a state of doubt whether he transgressed will work for at the time that he has becomes aware. Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Jules?
Yeah, I can still hear you.
Okay. I think Jules is having fine hearing. In any case, so
I see Charles and Donna going in and out. Are they on?
they're not on right now.
Yeah.
I don't know I don't know what's going on. It seems it's a Zoom thing, because first I had issues and then others.
Anti-Semitism. No question about it.
Yeah. Amar Ula. So Ula said, Lamanda Amar Asham Vade Loi Bayidi Betchila. According to Rabbi Tarfon, as we just explained, that an Asham, which is a sin offering that comes for these specific transgressions, that even if you knew about it, you bring this offering. Lamanda Amar Asham Vade Loi Bayidi Betchila. Let's see Charles trying again. Charles, can you hear us? No. I'll just call Charles and let him listen in that way.
Try dial-up. That worked for me
Yeah.
before. Now I'm back on audio, but try dial-up.
So Ama Ula, Lamanda Ama Asham Vade Loi Bayidi Batachila, according to the opinion, which is Rabbi Tarfon. Who, hi, I'm seeing you can't hear, so I just called you so you can listen.
Great, thank you. Anybody else having anything to?
Some people, I assume, because I see Jules coming in and out, but others can hear me, so I don't know what the issue
Okay,
is.
great. Thank you. We'll see. Thank you.
Okay. So,
Ask him if he tried dial-up.
yeah, I don't know. All right. Ama Ula, Lamanda Amar, so we're on the last line of Ayin Aleph, Amid Aleph, 71A, or 71B, I mean. Ama Ula said, Lamanda Ama Ashavada Lebayi Yediyah. So according to Rabbi Tarfon, as we just explained, that does not require knowledge of the transgression prior to having designated the sin offering, this asham offering. Baal chamisha be'ilas b'shivcha charufa. Somebody who inadvertently transgressed with a shivcha charufa, which even if he intentionally transgressed, it needs to bring a sin offering, this asham offering. But he unintentionally did. And it happened 5 times, and he became aware of his sin each time between, and nevertheless, it happened again. So, Baal Chomesh Be'ilas B'Shivcha Charufa, Eina Chayv La'achas. Since you don't need to become aware beforehand to bring the sin offering, so each one is going to be its own, even though that each one's its own separate transgression, because he became aware between them, nevertheless, the one offering, the one asham, will count for all of them, because as soon as he becomes aware, retroactively, the previous carbon, which is exactly the same as the one that he would need for this, counts for it. Maskef la Rav Amnuna. Rav Amnuna challenged Ula about this. Elamiyata, if that's the case, Baal v'hifresh. Somebody transgressed with a shivcha charufa, with this maidservant, and separated a carbon, v'hifresh carbon, and he separated a carbon to bring. And he comes to the Beis HaMikdash, v'amar, and he tells the kohen, this is my sin offering for the shivcha charufa, but wait, give me an hour so I can rush back and transgress one more time and cohabit with her and then bring the carbon. Hamteini li ache'eva, let me go transgress one more time, because after all, the offering is going to retroactively work. He would only need one sin offering. Amalei ma'aseh frasha kamis. So what are you talking about? You're talking about where he did the transgression after he's already designated the offering. That won't work. We're talking about where he's transgressed multiple times prior to the sin offering. He's already transgressed. Now the question is, but he's only designated the sin offering for one. Will it retroactively work for all? He said, but if you transgress after you've separated the offering, even before you brought it, just having separated it and designated the offering, it's too late. However, when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael, we know Rav Dimi traveled between Eretz Yisrael and Bavel. So when he came, according to Rabbi Akiva, that says that you do need knowledge before of having certainly transgressed before you can bring a asham vadai, which is the term for a sin offering when you know that you've transgressed, and it's in these 3 cases where you bring a sin offering even if you intentionally transgressed. So, if according to Rabbi Akiva, that you have to have knowledge of your transgression prior to bringing the sin offering. Baal chamesh be'ilas b'shivcha charufa chayva kalachas v'achas. Even this person who had 5 transgressions with a shivcha charufa, even if he had knowledge between them, it'll be a separate one, a separate offering for each one. Amalei Abaya harechatas the beini yedi betchila pliga Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish says, wait, we just learned that Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish have a disagreement in whether or not by a sin offering, whether you need knowledge of your transgression prior to designating it. And Rish Lakish is of the opinion that even if you did not know of the second transgression by the time you've designated the offering, nevertheless, it will work for the other transgression because it's of the same sin. Ishtik. So Rav Dimi was silent and didn't have a response. Amar le dimla b'maisa lacha frasha kamis. Rav Amnuna. Maybe what you're saying is like Rav Amnuna, that it will not cover a transgression that happened after you've already designated. So if both transgressions happened beforehand, you simply didn't know about it, then it'll cover it. But if the transgression happened after you have already designated the sin offering, so you transgressed, designated an offering, transgressed again, at that point, the second transgression is not going to be covered by the first carbon, because the first carbon has already been designated prior to the action of the sin. Amalei in says indeed that's where the halacha was said. Kiyasa Ravin, when Ravin came, and Ravin also traveled between the academies of Eretz Yisrael and Bavel. When he came, Amar, he said it this way. Everybody agrees in regards to a shivcha charufa. And everybody agrees in regards to a shivcha charufa. And there's a machlokas in regards to shivcha charufa. Now he's going to explain his three statements. One extreme is everybody agrees in. Another extreme everybody agrees in. And in the middle is where the machlokas is. Everybody agrees that in regards to a shivcha charufa, which, as we explained, somebody cohabits with this maidservant, and whatever the scenario is a discussion elsewhere in the Gemara, whether, but it's called a shivcha charufa. And this shivcha charufa, somebody cohabits with her, which is against halacha, so he transgresses. And if he knows about it, he brings a sin offering. If he doesn't know about it, he brings a sin offering, but he's not sure whether or not that he transgressed. And nevertheless, everybody will agree you only bring one offering. Kedu'ula. And that's in the case of Ula, where the person transgressed 5 times inadvertently, became, and after each time, the sin became known to them, and nevertheless, it happened again. The one offering that they bring for the first transgression will cover all of them, because all of the transgressions and the awarenesses happened prior to the sin offering. And everybody will agree in a certain case of shivcha charufa that they have to bring a sin offering for all of them. And what's that case? Rav Amnuna, like Rav Amnuna said. And that was the case where there was a transgression after the designation of the first sin offering. So the person transgressed, cohabited with the sin with a shivcha charufa, designated the asham shivcha charufa, the sin offering for shivcha charufa, and then cohabited again. So that second transgression is after the designation of the korban. It's not going to be covered. Yet there is a scenario where they disagree about shivcha charufa. Where's that? According to Rabbi Akiva, that a sin offering that comes for a certainty, when you for sure know that you transgressed, that you need knowledge prior to, you need the certainty, the knowledge prior to having brought the korban, but techila. So machlokas, that's where there's a machlokas, or Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, where Rabbi Yochanan is going to say that since you need the knowledge, so having inadvertently transgressed and then becoming aware is going to separate the two transgressions, because we see the awareness is the factor that defines your obligation of the sin offering, and therefore the awareness is going to be a separating factor between the one inadvertent act and the other. And as soon as you become aware of one, that will become its own individual prohibition and its own individual obligation of a korban, because the knowledge is the obligation. Whereas Reish Lakish says, no, as long as you haven't brought the sin offering, or at least not designated the offering, you're going to, the one offering will since it's the same, will cover multiple transgressions. Itmar. So now we're going back a little bit to Shabbos, but in the same concepts of inadvertent acts, and we're going to see a distinction between misasek and shagaga. Up until now, we were talking about shogeg, which we said as an inadvertent transgression. Inadvertent transgression over here means that it was an intentional act, but inadvertent transgression. They meant to plow the field. They forgot that today was Shabbos. They meant to plow the field, and they knew it was Shabbos, but they forgot that plowing was a transgression. So those are a shgaga, a ha'alama. Something was hidden from them, unbeknownst to them, and that's what the mistake is. They didn't know this act was prohibited, or they didn't know that the scenario was the prohibited scenario, meaning they didn't know it was Shabbos, or they didn't know that the act, they knew it was Shabbos, they didn't know that this is a prohibited act. But they intended to do the action itself. However, what happens if they didn't even intend that act? And we're going to see two levels. The extreme is they didn't intend to do the action at all. The second is where they intended the action, but they didn't realize that the scenario was within a scenario of prohibition. And the Gemara is going to explain. Nischavein lehagbias atalosh. Somebody intended to pick up a detached produce. Okay, so they harvested some tomatoes on Friday. They put them in a basket, and it's sitting on the ground out right near their tomato plant. And on Shabbos, they want to go out and pick up a tomato from the basket. So they bend down and they pick up a tomato, and leaning in the basket was one tomato that was still attached to the vine. And that's the one they happened to pick. And as a result, they intended to take a detached, already harvested item, but they actually harvested on Shabbos. So they never intended for the action to happen. They intended to pick up a already detached item. But he cut off something that was really connected to the ground. Putter. He's going to be exempt because he never intended the act. He never meant to harvest, to detach from the ground. But if he intended to cut something, he intended to cut a vine off of the tomato. He thought the vine was no longer detached to the ground. He thought that this tomato came along with part of the vine, and he wanted to cut the vine off of the tomato. So here, he's actually intending the action of cutting the tomato from the vine, but he thought that the vine was already detached, and therefore it's not a transgression. But instead, he cut an actual vine that was still attached to the ground. So here, Rava says Pater, and Abaye says Chayev. Or Rava Amar Pater, Abaye Amar Chayev. Rava Amar Pater, Halein is Chaven Lachaticha D'Isura. Rava says, look, he didn't intend to cut something that was attached to the ground. Abaye Amar Chayev, Dehakam Chaven Lachaticha Ba'alman. Abaye says, no, he is going to be held responsible. It does count as a shogeg and not a misasek. It's inadvertent transgression as opposed to an inadvertent act on account of, because he meant to cut. He meant to cut the vine from the tomato. So the action's the same, simply there was either a transgression or not. Amar Rava, we'll just do till the two dots. Amar Rava Mena Minala. Rava says, how do I know this? The Tani will learn. B'Shabbos Mishar Mitzvahs. Shabbos is stricter than the rest of the mitzvahs. In what? Chomer Shabbos, Shabbos, and also there's a stringency in all mitzvahs from Shabbos. Now, what is it? Chomer Shabbos, Mishar Mitzvahs, Shabbos, Asher Shtayim, Be'elam Echas, Ein Chai V'Lachas. Be'elam Echas, Chai V'Kolachas V'Achas. Shabbos, if in one lapse, meaning you didn't know that something was prohibited, and you did one transgression, and then you did another transgression, you're going to have to bring 2 sin offerings. Masha Enke B'Shah mitzvahs, not so by other mitzvahs. You did 2 transgressions in one lapse. You're going to only bring 1 sin offering. V'chomer B'Shah mitzvah Shabbos, B'Shah mitzvah Shogag B'lei Mischav and Chayev, Masha Enke B'Shabbos. Whereas the stringency in other mitzvahs is that in other mitzvahs you did an inadvertent act, even though you didn't intend. Nevertheless, you're going to be obligated. And Shabbos is different. So here, Rava sees that by Shabbos, you have to intend for the act. Tomorrow, we'll continue with analysis of this brisa and the response of Abai and Rava about Davashay and Mischavin, about Misasek, where you're really trying to do one thing and something else was the result.